Chapter 1. Feather in the Fog. Altdorf stank of rot and smoke, of spent dreams and wet wool. In the Drecksack district, where the gutters choked on half-clogged refuse and the fog rolled in like a funeral shroud each dawn, the only law was the knife, and the only salvation lay in the speed of your legs or the stillness of your shadow. Korst Vanlehr moved like both. He was lean, wiry, and caked in the street's grime, not so much wearing the city as having become part of its flesh. His cloak, torn at the hem and patched with the remnants of stolen linens, flapped behind him as he darted through narrow alleyways, one hand clutching a warm loaf just pried from the baker's stand, the other hand pressed against the bruises from the scuffle, a harsh reminder that even starving merchants had fists. Rain lashed the cobbles, sluicing down walls in sooty streaks. Thunder cracked above like Sigmar's hammer on steel. The heavens had opened with a fury rarely seen, a deluge so sudden that even the muttering drunks beneath tarps ceased their curses and looked up, wondering if Moore himself now walked the clouds. Korst ducked into a collapsed building, the roof long gone, now a carcass of timbers and black mold. He slid into the shadows and tore a mouthful from the loaf, not caring that it was soaked. Hunger was hunger. The taste brought tears, or maybe it was the wind flinging grit into his eyes. Then the storm changed. Not louder, not fiercer, stranger. A silence dropped into the world. Unnatural, as though a vast breath had been taken in. The rain slowed, not in intensity but in rhythm. Each droplet seemed to fall like a bead of molten glass, slow and deliberate. The fog deepened into a curtain of wool. He felt it before he saw it, a vibration in the air, like the moment before a spell cracks the veil. A light, blue impossibly 508, split the gloom. Korst turned his head sharply, eyes wide. From the thick gray heavens above, something cut through the air, trailing an iridescent tail of glowing cinders. It spun downward in a slow, spiraling descent, graceful like a dancer's ribbon, and then it stabbed the cobblestones before him with a piercing hiss, embedding itself with a sound like ice scraping metal. Feather. He blinked. Not merely blue, this thing shimmered with hues beyond his tongue to name. Cerulean bled into indigo, flickered with violet at the edges, and each barbed spine pulsed faintly, like the glow of a smoldering brand. Rain hissed off it, evaporating before it touched the quill. Korst approached cautiously. Around him the city breathed again. Noise returned. Distant shouting, the bark of a mongrel, the heavy tread of boots on wet stone. He crouched, gaze fixed, unsure why his heart beat like a drum of war. Greed won. He plucked the feather from the stone. Pain, not his own, screeched through his skull. A flurry of voices whispered and howled and muttered, incoherent yet terrifyingly close. Faces of people he didn't recognize flashed before his eyes. A tower, a burning book, a laughing mouth with too many teeth. Silence again. The feather cooled in his hand. It felt warm, comforting, alive. Footsteps interrupted the stillness, many, heavy, armed. Korst turned sharply. 3 men approached from the mouth of the alley, oil lanterns flickering on chainmail and leather. At their head was a man in a black hat, brim-wide, bearing the twin-tailed comet of Sigmar and a medallion in the shape of a burning pyre. A witch-hunter. "Nail," the man barked. His voice was iron wrapped in sanctimony. Korst's breath caught. They had to be after someone else, some hedge mage, some 2-bit charlatan. But then he saw the look in the hunter's eyes. They already knew. He ran. The alley betrayed him. A dead end, with crates and rusting barrels piled against a crumbling wall. Behind him, boots pounded stone, steel was drawn. Stop, in the name of Sigmar. Korst turned, cornered like a rat, heart thudding against ribs. He reached into his cloak, searching for a blade, a rock, anything. His hand brushed the feather. It was burning hot now. It pulsed. It sang in his bones. No thought, no understanding. He raised it. The world split. Blue fire erupted, not like flame, but like reality being peeled away. A bolt of sorcerous energy surged from the feather, spearing forward with a scream that shattered windows and thought alike. The frontmost soldier was thrown back, his armor blackened, eyes wide in death. The others fell, stunned, groaning, blinded by the blast. Korst staggered, feathers smoking in his grip. He didn't wait to see more. He leapt over the fallen crates, scaling the wall like a desperate lizard, and vanished into the city. He ran for blocks, unthinking, unseeing, until the sounds of pursuit faded behind him. Only when he ducked into the dry, dusty cellar of a long-abandoned brewery 999, he stopped. He slumped against the wall, chest heaving, arms trembling. He stared at the feather. "What are you?" he whispered, voice hoarse. Then the realization came. Small, quiet, terrifying. He remembered the alley, the bread, the chase, to remember his name, Korst Vanlehr. But something was missing. He closed his eyes, trying to picture her. The girl who 500 laughed in the candlelight with a chipped wooden flute. The one who always bandaged his bruises with whatever scrap she had. What was her name? He clutched his head, panic rising. No answer came. The feather glowed softly in the dark. Chapter 2. Smoke and Sanction. Rain lingered in Altdorf for 3 more days after the night of the falling feather, as if the heavens themselves sought to wash away the residue of something unclean. The Tzeentch district sank further into its perpetual damp, the air thick with mildew and the faint metallic tang of the Reich nearby. To most it was another miserable week. To Korst Vanlehr it was the beginning of power. He had not meant to use the feather again. The memory of that first blast, how the world had folded in on itself, how his body had burned without heat, still haunted him. Yet every time he looked upon it, lying innocently on the cracked table of his makeshift hovel, it shimmered like temptation itself. The glow was faint in daylight, but pulsed at night, like the heartbeat of some hidden creature waiting for its host to awaken. On the 4th evening, hunger won again. A merchant caravan had parked outside the southern gate, laden with wares bound for Wissenland, silks, spices, a few lockboxes glinting with promise. Korst had been watching them since dawn. He was no fool, there were guards, at least 6, perhaps more. Yet something in him whispered that no gate, no man, no steel could stop him now. When the sun sank and torches burned in the mist, Korst touched the feather. He didn't even need to hold it anymore, just to let his thoughts slide toward it. The air thickened, the world stretched thin like cloth over a flame, and when he stepped forward his boots made no sound. The fog embraced him fully. He walked past the guards as if he were made of smoke. They didn't look up. They didn't breathe differently. One even leaned on the very barrel he slipped behind, muttering about pay and women. Korst smiled. By dawn he had gold, real gold, and a gemstone the color of sunrise clutched in his palm. But when he stumbled back into his hideout, panting and half-drunk on victory, he realized something was wrong. He couldn't remember the face of the merchant he 500 stolen from. Not even his voice. It was as if that part of the night had dissolved into vapor, replaced by a dull hum in his skull. He shrugged it off. Memory was cheap. Gold was not. Weeks passed, and the feather's gifts grew wilder. He learned that a thought could conjure sparks in his fingertips, that a whisper could twist light itself into shapes that deceived the eye. He found he could leap across rooftops with unnatural grace, that a shadow could stretch to hide him entirely. But each trick left something behind, something taken from within him. The first time he summoned fire, he felt it, a tearing sensation behind his eyes, like a page being ripped from a book. He could no longer recall the smell of his mother's hair. The second time, he made a man see an illusion, an open street where a wall stood. The poor fool broke his neck against it, believing himself free. That night, Korst tried to remember his mother's face and realized he could not even recall if she had been blonde, dark-handed, or something between. The feather fed on him, and still he used it. Rumors in Altdorf spread faster than plague. Within a fortnight, talk of a blue fire thief crept from the gutters to the taverns, and from there to ears better trained to listen. Unauthorized sorcery in the capital was not a small matter. It was heresy dressed as rebellion, and rebellion was something the Empire 999 not tolerate. At the colleges of magic, nestled upon the Isle of the Colleges, across the Reek, a report reached the halls of the Amethyst Order, the death mages of Mor's domain. They dealt not in living flame, but in endings, and few things drew their attention faster than tales of power escaping its lawful bounds. Magister Harl Brecht was the first to read the report. Young for his station, his eyes were the pale gray of storm glass, his face too thoughtful for his own good. He sat beneath the flickering lantern light in the Hall of Veils, tracing the script with a gloved finger. Unauthorized channeling, blue spectral fire, victims reduced to ash, no licensed magister in proximity. The parchment crackled as he folded it. Brecht had read enough. He sought out his mentor, Magisterin Elsbeth Kalt, a wizened woman with half her skull tattooed in the purple runes of her order. She listened in silence as he recited the details, her eyes distant. When he finished, she spoke without looking up. "Blue flame," she murmured, "and unlicensed. That is not amethyst, nor bright, nor celestial. You know what it sounds like, boy?" Brecht hesitated. "Demoncraft." She nodded once. "Tzeentch's touch." Korst, meanwhile, grew rich and lost in ways no coin could fill. His face appeared harder in the cracked mirror he 500 scavenged from a noble's refuse heap. His eyes had changed. The left shimmered faintly, reflecting light where there was none. He was no longer fully himself. But then again, he could no longer recall who that self had been. Some nights he woke to whispers, soft, coaxing, in languages he didn't understand. The feather would lie beside him, pulsing with faint, rhythmic light. Once, he thought he saw it twitch. On the 7th week, he encountered a man in a tavern. A scholar from Nuln, pale and trembling, his robes damp with spilled ale. They spoke of curiosities, of relics, and when Korst mentioned his blue quill, the man froze. "You found it," the scholar breathed. "Sigmar preserve us. A daemon's fragment. You fool, what you carry is not a tool. It's a tongue. It's speaking through you." Korst's laugh was hollow. "And it's made me rich." The scholar's hand shook as he opened a leather-bound grimoire. Etched across one yellowed page was an image that froze Korst's breath. A creature made of fire and mockery, half bird, half man, its body splitting into two laughing horrors. "Blue horror," the text read, "servant of the changer of ways. When slain, its essence fragments, each piece seeking a host to corrupt." The scholar's voice faltered. "You carry part of one, thief. Every spell you cast draws you closer to what it was." Korst rose from the table and left without a word. The man didn't follow. Outside, the fog was thick, almost sentient. The feather glowed faintly within his cloak, as if aware of the conversation. Closer to what it was, Korst whispered to himself, his breath misting. He held the feather up to the 1499 streetlight, and for an instant, just an instant, he thought he saw a shape moving within it. Something smiling. He clenched his fist. From the far side of the river, the bells of the colleges tolled midnight. On the aisle, Magister Brett donned his cloak, the runes on his staff dimly alight. He had been granted sanction to investigate. The hunt had begun. And in the slums, a thief with half a memory and a demon's whisper in his hand dreamed of gold, and forgot the sound of his own laughter. Chapter 3. Names in Ashes. The city had changed. Or perhaps Korst had. Altdorf's alleys now twisted in ways they hadn't before, he was sure of it. Streets he had known since childhood, bent at strange angles, or dead-ended in blank walls that hadn't existed a week prior. The stars above no longer moved in their ancient, silent rhythm. They flickered, trembled, shifted, sometimes spelling names he couldn't read. Korst wandered beneath them, hunched in his patched cloak, the feather always close, tucked behind his belt or clenched in his fingers when sleep eluded him. Its pulse, once faint and curious, now throbbed with a possessive rhythm. He didn't dream anymore. He only remembered fragments of people he didn't recognize. The girl found him near the crumbling statue of Magnus the Pious, in a courtyard so overgrown and forgotten it had become a sanctuary for rats and the destitute. He had just finished scattering a trio of guards using a mirror trick the feather whispered into his skull, a dazzling burst of false lightning that blinded and scattered them. Easy. Too easy. He was laughing when she spoke. Korst? The sound of his name, not shouted, not snarled, but spoken, made him flinch. She stood at the far side of the statue, cloaked, mud on her hem, a satchel clutched tightly in both hands. Her eyes, dark and raw, searched his face. He frowned. Who are you? Something in her face cracked. You don't know me. It wasn't a question. Developing chorus stepped back, uncertain. He felt the feather pulse at his side, as if reacting to her presence. Should one? She exhaled sharply, blinking back something wet. We were lovers, Korst. Before all this, before you found it. Her voice was steady, but each word felt carved from grief. Your name's been whispered from tavern corners to patrols, sorcery, fire, vanishing acts. But one hoped. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small wooden flute. You carved this, for me, from that dead ash tree behind your old squat. Korst stared at the object as if it were a weapon. He didn't recognize it. Not the grain, not the design, not even the idea of having ever carved anything. One don't know you, he said. You've got the wrong man. No, her voice broke then. You've just forgotten. He turned, ashamed or angry, he couldn't tell. The feather pulsed hotter. Images flickered behind his eyes, the two of them under a tattered sheet, whispering in the dark, hands clutched tight. A garden once, or a rooftop. A kiss shared during the storm of shadows 2 winters ago. Gone, like paper turned to ash. When he looked back, she was gone too. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat beneath the hollow arches of a burned-out temple, knees pulled to his chest, staring at the feather by firelight. What, don't remember her, he muttered. She's lying. But even his own voice sounded hollow. The feather said nothing, though it pulsed like a heart. They found him the next morning. Not the witch hunters, not the guards. They wore tattered cloaks of deep gray and dark crimson, their faces veiled, eyes shadowed. They approached with reverence, not threat. The one who led them introduced himself as Thal Murrock, a name that didn't echo in the streets. His voice was low, melodic, touched with an accent Korst couldn't place. "We've been watching you," Thal said. "You have something few possess, the courage to grasp power untamed by law or fear." Korst bristled, ready to flee, but Thal raised his hands. "No weapons, no threats. We are like you. Touched by things the colleges fear. We protect those they would burn." At first Korst scoffed, but when Thal described the dreams, the voices, the memories leaking like spilled wine, the feather's pulse, Korst listened. He followed them into the sewers beneath the Tzeentch district. There, hidden beneath layers of ruin and history, was a chamber carved with forbidden sigils. Candles burned in colors fire had no right to burn in. Strange relics floated in glass jars, teeth, feathers, lumps of flesh still twitching. And others were there. Not many, but enough. Men and women with eyes that glowed faintly, who whispered in tongues their mouths had never been taught. One bore a burn across her face in the perfect shape of a sunburst. Another's veins ran black beneath pale skin. "Here," Thal said. "You can learn. Control it. Be more than some hunted beast." For a moment Korst believed him. Then he saw the altar. The bones, the still fresh offerings. He asked what they sacrificed. Tol's smile was gentle. "What we cannot afford to keep." It didn't feel like a decision, not right away, but that night, while sleeping in the back of a wine merchant's abandoned loft, Korst was awoken by clanking boots and the rasp of drawn steel. The witch hunters had found him. 4 of them, torches, crossbows. One bore a chain engraved with holy script, dragging it through the puddles behind him like a leash. The feather burned his side before he even reached for it. One more time, it seemed to say. He had power enough to burn them to bones, to vanish into smoke. He could join the cult, cloak himself in madness, become something no man could touch again. He could stop. He could drop the feather, face whatever truth came next. Maybe remember her. Maybe remember himself. The torchlight danced on the walls. His hand trembled, and the feather pulsed, waiting for his choice. Chapter 4. Featherlight Truths. The night was the color of old ink, thick and smothering, pressing against the rooftops of Altdorf like the weight of a buried secret. Rain whispered along the gutters, a ghostly drizzle that turned to steam whenever it touched the blue fire bleeding from Korst Vanlehr's trembling hands. He ran through the labyrinth of the Tzeentch district, barefoot now, his cloak half burned away. The feather pulsed at his hip, its glow no longer soft or mesmerizing but violent, a living thing of azure hate. It had ceased whispering days ago. Now it sang. Behind him came the boots. The witch hunters. 5, maybe 6. The clatter of chain and the bark of orders echoed off the stone walls. Their torches threw hungry shadows through the fog. Korst's lungs burned. He had been running since dawn, through alleys that folded on themselves, through memories that no longer belonged to him. He couldn't remember what he was running for, only that something terrible followed him, something that knew his name. A crossbow bolt screamed past his ear and shattered against the wall. Splinters stung his cheek. By Sigmar's light stopped. He didn't. He couldn't. Korst ducked beneath a low archway, vaulted over a crate, and burst into a narrow courtyard hemmed by ruined walls. There was nowhere left to run, only the fetid stench of old rainwater and refuse. He pressed his back to the wall and drew the feather from beneath his belt. It felt heavier than it should, like iron, like debt. The rain hissed where it touched its surface. It pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. He heard the witch hunters spreading out, forming a half-circle around the courtyard's entrance. The leader's voice was harsh and certain. "By authority of the Holy Order of Templars of Sigmar, you are bound by law. Surrender your heretical relic and name your master." Korst blinked at him through the veil of rain. The words didn't make sense. "Ter," he whispered. His voice sounded foreign, dry. The feather pulsed again, and he felt it in his skull. A door opening, a choice laid bare. One more time. He raised it. The world broke. A soundless roar erupted, a collapse of color, a howl of blue and violet fire. The cobbles split and the courtyard vanished beneath a tide of shimmering chaos. The witch hunters screamed as their bodies were torn into motes of glowing ash, their armor melting and fusing with the stone. One fell to his knees, clutching his face as it dissolved into fractal light. The torches went out, replaced by a pulsing glow that painted the fog in dreamlike hues. The air itself screamed. And then, silence. When it was over, the world was still. The rain fell again, this time hissing faintly against the steaming stones. The courtyard was scorched into glass. What had been men moments before were now only outlines, burned into the earth. Korst stood in the center of it all, feather raised, eyes empty. His breath came in ragged, shallow bursts. The power within him ebbed, leaving behind only a hollow, aching stillness. He tried to think, to remember. Nothing came. Not his name, not the city, not what the thing in his hand was. He looked down at the feather, blinking dumbly, as if seeing it for the first time. His lips moved. Feather. He felt wrong on his tongue. Something deep inside him, something human, shuddered, then slipped quietly into the dark. Hours passed, or days, he couldn't tell. He wandered through streets he didn't recognize, silent, eyes glazed with confusion. People avoided him. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the faint blue light that still clung to his skin, or the way his shadow didn't quite follow the light. He slept in doorways, stole food without knowing it, spoke to no one. Words drifted through his head like smoke. None stayed. Once he stared into a puddle and saw a stranger's reflection, a man with hollow cheeks, a burned jawline, eyes like pale glass. His hands trembled constantly, as if trying to remember the shape of something precious. When they finally caught him, 2 soldiers and a magister in purple robes, he didn't resist. He didn't know how. Magister Brecht had been tracking the trail of blue fire for months. He had seen what it left behind, burned corpses, warped stone, whispers of mutation. And now, here it was, the source of it all, sitting in the mud, clutching a broken feather and staring blankly at the cobbles. "Is he dangerous?" one of the soldiers asked. Brecht studied him. The man's eyes were clouded, his skin was pale as wax. The feather in his hands glowed faintly, a dying ember. "No," Brecht said softly, "not anymore." He crouched before Korst, studying the faint sigils burned into his fingers. He saw the ruin of a man who had once stood on the edge of transcendence and been devoured by it. "Do you know who I am?" Brecht asked. Korst blinked at him. His mouth worked soundlessly. "Nah," he muttered. Lost name." Brecht exhaled slowly, a sound halfway between pity and disgust. "Then you are free of him." He rose and turned to his men. "Let him go." The soldiers hesitated. "My lord, he's... Go." They obeyed. Brecht watched as Korst stumbled away, moving like a man sleepwalking through fog. When he was gone, the Magister looked once more at the blackened feather that lay half buried in the mud where Korst had dropped it. Its light was fading, the blue dulling to gray. "Tzeentch," he murmured, voice low, almost reverent. "You've already claimed your due." He turned and walked into the rain. Korst wandered aimlessly until the city thinned and the streets grew quiet. The feather's glow was gone now. Only a faint, residual warmth remained in his palm. He sat beneath an old bridge, shivering, his thoughts flickering like dying coals. Something stirred in the darkness of his mind. A word. A name. He mouthed it silently. Sarah. It was soft, barely a whisper, fragile as a snowflake. But even as he said it, the meaning slipped away, lost to the same wind that carried the rain. He closed his eyes and smiled faintly, unaware of the single blue plume that still lay in the mud beside him, humming with the last breath of impossible power. Then he forgot why he was smiling. Chapter 5. A Beggar's Trade. The docks of Altdorf were never silent, not truly. Even in the gray hours before dawn, when fog blanketed the river and most of the city slept in sour-laced slumber, this corner of the empire's heart stirred with murmurs, clatters, and the low groans of moored ships creaking against their lines. The Reich rolled past in sullen, endless currents, and the warehouses along its banks hunched like slumbering beasts, their eyes darkened by soot and disuse. Near a broken sewer grate, beside a collapsed fish stall long abandoned, a figure moved in the muck. He was draped in rags more filth than cloth, the remnants of a coat that might once have been noble, now mottled with mildew, patched with string stiffened by the seasons. His beard was tangled with crumbs, his eyes the glazed gray of frost-slicked stone. No one knew his name, no one asked, but they called him Bluefather. He sat cross-legged in the muck, humming tunelessly, rocking gently as the rain drizzled down. The city's footsteps moved around him like river water flowing around a stone, some cautious, some dismissive, most utterly indifferent. Children sometimes threw stones at him, daring each other to touch his sleeve. Traders tossed crusts when pity overtook disgust. And always, always, he laughed. A low, bubbling cackle, full of secrets and nonsense and sorrow, stretched so thin it had forgotten what it used to be. And behind his right ear, tucked with absurd pride into a tangle of hair, was a brilliant blue feather. It shimmered as if freshly plucked, undimmed by rain or grime. People had tried to steal it, once. The last boy who 500 dared had run screaming into the alleys after Korst whispered something into his ear, something no one could understand, but that left the boy too afraid to sleep indoors again. So the feather remained. Korst, if he still remembered that name, stirred in his nest of broken crates and crumpled newspapers, grinning through cracked teeth. His fingers traced patterns in the filth, spirals, circles, runes that didn't quite exist. Sometimes he spoke aloud. Sometimes he just murmured. Feather fire, fire feathers, flames and names, and who's to blame? His eyes flicked skyward. The clouds were thick with unfallen rain, and somewhere distant, thunder rolled. "You're watching, ain't you?" he muttered, wagging a finger at the sky. "You've always watched, since the sky cracked, since the teeth smiled." A child approached. Small, filthy, the type of gutter brat born between barrels and raised on theft. Bare feet, a grimy tunic, and sharp eyes. He clutched something in his hands, something warm, steaming faintly in the chill. Half a meat pie. Korst's eyes locked on. The boy hesitated. "You're the crazy feather man, yeah?" Korst smiled. "Feathers don't go crazy, they fly, or fall." The boy squinted. 100 give you this pie for your feather?" Silence. The feather glimmered behind Korst's ear. The beggar tilted his head, considering. For a moment something flickered behind his ruined gaze, something sharper, colder, more aware. It passed like a ripple beneath ice. Then he leaned forward, eyes wide with childlike glee. "Deal struck, deal sealed," he chirped. "Bread for breath, flesh for flight." With an exaggerated flourish, he plucked the feather and handed it to the boy as if bestowing a crown. The boy, half scared, half thrilled, snatched it and dropped the pie onto Korst's lap before bolting off into the mist. Korst didn't watch him go. He stared down at the pie, steam curling like incense. He took a slow bite, closing his eyes, savoring it, as if it were the first meal of his life. Somewhere in the fog, footsteps pattered. The boy had vanished into the city, and in his small, grimy fist the feather began to glow. Just faintly, just enough. Across the docks, atop the shadowed parapet of an old watchtower, something unseen stirred. Something vast and smiling, its form shifting in a dozen directions at once, too vast for mortal minds to comprehend. Eyes blinked open and closed without rhythm. Fingers like quills wrote names on the wind. The game had begun again. The new pawn was moving. Tzeentch watched, and he laughed.